everyone. Look at these eager beavers. There's like 32 people here already. And this is not our typical day. So extra session, lucky people. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Aucademy. I am Dr. Chloe Farahar. I am a white person with a shaved head, giant glasses, and like a black and white gingham linen dress because it's roasting. Still in the UK to some extent, and it's very exciting today. I'm so pleased to be talking about PDA today, which we will go over what even is that, with Kristy Forbes, Tanya Adkin and Bobbi Elman. And if I can ask people to do physical descriptions. So Tanya, do you want to go first for me?
Hi, my name's Tanya. I am a white female presenting person with tied back dark blonde hair, glasses and a nice comfy cardigan.
Fantastic. And can I ask Kristy if that's okay to do a physical description?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kristy. I am a white woman and I have dark hair. It looks a bit like Astro Boy's hairdo this morning because it's 5 a.m. It's shaved on the sides. I have a mullet. I have big gold draping earrings and a black blouse with white hearts all over it. Oh, and I'm wearing glasses.
Fantastic. I love it how we forget some things because they're just like part of the decor for our faces, right? Actually, we're all wearing glasses. Interesting. And Bobbi, if you could do a physical description for me, please.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Bobbi Elman. I am an extremely white presenting female with kind of red, raspberry red kind of hair and black band in. Black glasses, and I'm wearing a black top.
Fantastic stuff. And I've already asked, lots of people are already saying hello, which is really lovely. And I've already asked as well, so that we can see what people think later. What does PDA mean to you? So that'd be quite interesting. If there's any other PDAs in the comment section, I'd like us, we need more of this, don't we? We're going to get into this, like why we need to hear much more from the different voices of people who experience the PDA profile. So we've had Tanya and Bobbi on a small number of times. So I'm going to ask, if that's okay, Kristy, in terms of, we know you're Kristy, but who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests?
So I am a late identified autistic PDA with ADHD. I facilitate principled communities for families raising neurodivergent children, and I specialise in supporting neurodivergent people and their families. I run training sessions for allied health and educators to learn about autism. And my dedicated interests, PDA, definitely PDA. Yeah, I'm also a parent of 4 PDA autistic children.
And we've talked about this as well before, like, for instance, Tanya, a lot of us, we end up with, not always, but our dedicated interest becomes our identities and our community, which can be a beautiful thing. If not, also very exhausting sometimes, I think, because it's something a friend of mine says that, for instance, they say, their gay job is their day job. So like, because they are a mentor for LGBTQIA plus people, and it means they never get to switch off because their gay job is their day job, which I like as a phrase though, because it sounds really stimmy. Thank you very much. And we could do this for all 3 of you actually, just to give that brief, because we're talking about the PDA profile today as well. So when did you discover, for instance, Kristy, that you were autistic? And then added on to that, and then when did you discover PDA?
So my 11-year-old, I knew when she was a baby that she was autistic. And I don't know how to answer how I knew, but I just had this intuition that she was autistic. And along the way, I used to wonder, how do I know? How do I understand her so much? And I think I worked out that I was autistic. I had a moment where, I'd had this lifelong experience of reading self-help books and going to professionals and trying to figure out what my inherent flaws were, like why I couldn't be like everyone else. And I remember having this moment one morning where I could feel I was going to explode. My baby was crying. My teen was asking me the same questions over and over. I didn't realize my older children were autistic. I just thought this one baby that I had was autistic. And I was going to have a meltdown, and I excused myself. I said, I'm just going to go and take 5 minutes. And I remember sitting on the bed, and I was stimming. I was counting back and forth. I was doing all the autistic things, and I had this profound moment. And I remember gasping and saying out loud, oh my God, I'm autistic. And then went off and was diagnosed. I had been told I was a PDA in 2015 by a psychologist, and I didn't believe it because I didn't believe PDA was a thing. I thought, no, that's just another label. I can be better than this. And then when I was 41, I was diagnosed with ADHD. So, yeah, late diagnosed everything.
Can I get a bit of a timeline with that then? So whenabouts are we saying you worked out you're autistic?
33, I was diagnosed. 32, I think I worked it out. 2015, which makes me about 36 then, I was told I had a PDA profile, and then 41 diagnosed ADHD. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting. Oh no, there's so many questions. So if you see me making notes, that's why. Because in my head, I'm also like, we know this, don't we? That other things about us can make it harder for us to recognize the other elements of, I talk about this a lot, about what kind of pie are we, or what kind of pastry, like what's the ingredients that makes you so like part of your ingredients, feel free to just describe what kind of pie or pastry you are. I joke, and Tanya always laughs with me, that I'm like a ready salted pretzel because I'm relatively just autistic, in the sense it's the most, I know, but into the sense it's the most dominant part of my experience of being neurodivergent. Whereas like my friend Annette is autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic with attention differences and AFAN and all these sorts of things. So we joke that they're like a vegan rainbow sprinkled donut or something. Like really exciting. And so yeah, so I'm just wondering. It's too exciting to ask. I have to ask. So what do we think gets missed and why? So I'm assuming for the four of us here that as assigned female at birth people, we probably missed as autistic because we had the audacity to be born female. So why were the other things about all three of you actually missed? So let me come back to that because I still need to ask the others. Sorry, it's too exciting. So why
are you sure you're just ready salted autistic, Chloe?
Thank you.
For the 30,000th time.
For people who can't see me on the screen, I'm side-eyeing, like, So that gives me a little bit of a picture of Kristy's type of pie or pastry or whatever you might be. If you decide, you can have a think about what you are. So Tanya, what about your pastry? What kind of pastry are you?
So I am a hyperfant. So I'd see lots and lots in pictures constantly, consistently, and big feelings and big emotions. It's quite overwhelming. I am hyperempathic or empathetic, whichever one you prefer. ADHD and autistic, with probably a big, massive, healthy dog of demand avoidance, which I quite demand avoid because I don't like the way that it's characterized in research. So yeah, that's me. Kieran, no attention differences there, Chloe.
Exactly. Thank you. Sorry, I'm shutting up.
It's fine. I'm shushing Kieran. Shush, Kieran. Shush.
And quite a bit of exposure anxiety as well in there. So yeah, there's always several parts to us, I think.
Yeah.
And yours is similar, that you recognise you're autistic following your children being recognised as autistic?
Yeah, so for me, I did my eldest started primary school, and the wheels fell off very, very rapidly, very, very quickly within days, because he's a very proprioceptive, doesn't feel pain, kind of rough and tumble. You can imagine how that went. And I did the thing that any self-respecting undiagnosed autistic person would do, and dived straight into the books, into every piece of research. It was, I can literally picture myself sitting at my kitchen counter with the laptop, with the books, with the printouts and all the other stuff, and just literally sucked up and absorbed all this knowledge about, you know, disability law, SEND law, social care law, autism, ADHD and all the other stuff. And I think I was just sat there and I just scratched my head and I was like, but he was no different to me. Oh shit. And then and then I looked at my parents and the difficulties that they'd had, that had always been conceptualized as addiction or mental health problems, which are now, they understand they're autistic, and my grandparents, and you can literally trace it through my entire family. So yeah, it was a horrible thing for my son to have to go through without the appropriate support, but for the whole family, it's been massively, massively helpful, really.
Yeah.
Bobbi, similar? What kind of pastry or ingredients make up your pastry? I don't know why it's pastry. It could be anything. It could be stew.
So everything the reason Tanya and I get along so well is because basically everything she just says I resonate with. It's like exactly the same, pretty much. You know, I see pictures constantly. I'm hyper empathetic. I'm autistic, ADHD, without a doubt. This calculus, so numbers mean nothing to me at all. Have Ehlers-Danlos. So I'm like, and growing up, I was just considered different. Like it, you know, it didn't, I'm old. So I say it constantly. I'm 53 years old. So, you know, when I was growing up in the 70s, girls weren't even considered. It was never, we weren't looked at unless you were definitely non-mouth using, mouth word using, or had learning disabilities of any kind or learning differences of any kind. Then you were looked at. But me, nah. And funny enough, so my two are 21 and 23. The 23-year-old isn't diagnosed, but doesn't need to be. We pretty much recognize definitely autistic, definitely ADHD. 21-year-old was bombastic as a child and dealt with exposure anxiety on an extreme level. So was diagnosed. I worked with kids for over 16 years. I did a post-grad in autism. Still didn't think I was. It wasn't until right before lockdown and talking to Kieran, who I will always say is my guru, because he literally helped me realize that, wow, you are. And then I started talking to other friends and they were all like, well, Bob, we already thought you knew that. Like we thought you knew that you were definitely ADHD. Do you remember, Tanya, when I said to you, they think I'm ADHD, and you were like, oh, like, when did you know?
I still laugh about that. Yeah, like, because you'd gone for your autism screening thing and you came away in complete like overwhelming shock because they'd said ADHD, and me and Kieran sat there and were like, yeah, we thought you knew that.
Yeah.
We assumed that you knew.
We're always the last to know, aren't we? Everyone else knows but us.
Yeah.
That's like with Tigger, like our lovely Tigger as well. And he realised, everybody was like, we thought you knew. And he only realised during the lockdown and things. Yeah. Okay, too many thoughts. We need to jump in at the start before I get into my, like, this is all too interesting, in talking about what even is this thing that we're talking about, which I know is like right at the start now, because Kristy's probably been explaining this stuff for a very long time. But I want us to talk about what it is really. So like I've done sessions where I'm like, what is autistic experience really? What is masking when Kieran's come on really? Not the stereotypes, not the things that we see in the literature and things like that, which I know it's a huge topic because we're talking about lived experience. But if you were going to boil it down, what would we say this thing is called PDA?
Gosh, that's a huge question. I think I'm so careful about this because I can talk about my experience only, and I know that within our community, within the autistic community, there's so many experiences and opinions, and there's a lot of arguing about the actual existence of PDA. I personally could never deny its existence because it's my lived experience. And, you know, the research only started in the 80s. It's so young. It is so young. And I think for me, it is pervasive. It exists all of the time. And so PDA for me is having this threat response that is activated consistently. And so that means that my brain is always assessing for threat. And it's not that different, excuse me, the way that my brain, that my neurobiology responds to my environment is not that different from a person who has experienced trauma. But my PDA is not caused by trauma. But there's a very fine line that it moves in and out of, because I am so predisposed to experience trauma because of the way that I am wired. So my brain is constantly assessing for threat. Sometimes I'm conscious of that, sometimes I'm not. The demand avoidance, it's so much more than what is written about it. There's so much more to it. And I think a lot of people read about PDA, or they hear someone speaking about it for 5 or 10 minutes, and they think it's just an autistic person with heightened anxiety, or an autistic person with a side of trauma. I mean, please show me an autistic person that doesn't have some form of trauma to begin with. But, or they think it's an autistic person that can't be told what to do. And those are just such small parts of what PDA is for me. And also this assumption that it's about needing to be in control all the time, whereas for me it's about balance. It's about being like this with people, places and things all the time. And demands and pressure can be so many different things for each person who experiences PDA. There are so many forms of demand avoidance. There is being autistic and being demand avoidant. There is having extreme anxiety. There is autistic inertia. There's ADHD and demand avoidance. There is executive functioning challenges. And I think there's so much overlap that people experience particular characteristics like demand avoidance, and sometimes the assumption's made that it's PDA. And I know that people have a really hard time with the word pathological, and language is really important to me because I'm passionate about positive neurodivergent identity and culture. And yet I have to say that pathological sums it up for me personally. It really does, because it exists in my relationship with the world. It exists in my relationship with others, and it exists in my relationship with myself. PDA prevents me from being able to do things in my own life that bring me joy. If I get too excited about something, it escalates my threat response. So it's not just about not wanting to do things because they're scary, or not wanting to do things because someone's asking me to do them. It's about what my brain perceives as a threat, and I don't have conscious choice over that. I really don't. And so something I find is I'm very careful about who I discuss this with, because I'm aware that there are so many people whose drive it is to prove that PDA doesn't exist. And I also think that's a really positive thing too sometimes, because that's science, right? That's how we conduct research, disproving that something exists. But the way we're going about it in the autistic community is invalidating people's experiences. And I think we should know better as autistic people, because so many of us have had our autistic experience invalidated, and it's so dangerous and so dehumanizing. And now I'm ranting and I'm going.
No, it's fine. I'm just thinking there's so many things to pick apart in just that like one fantastic autistic monologue, right? Okay, because you touched on something I was hoping we were going to talk about, so we can come back to that because I've already got it flagged, which is the different types of demand avoidance. Because when I'm listening, I'm hearing the issue as well. It's the same as with everything else. The way this thing called pathological demand avoidance, in quotation marks for everyone who can't see me do my air quotes, which I do a lot, is, again, it's been described by outsiders looking at the person. So they're seeing this thing and calling it, oh, they're avoiding demands. And like you said, that's not what's necessarily happening. And then people misunderstanding even what avoiding demands means. They typically will go to, I've told my child to brush their teeth. And so we can talk a bit more about that. So we'll come back to the different types of demand avoidance in quotation marks, because actually that's quite important, because I experience the same thing. I'm sure Tanya and Bobbi do when they have to consult with people that you described, which is teachers, for instance, going, oh, I think they're PDA. And then we meet the young person and we're like, no, they've got autistic inertia, or they're having monotropic flow, or, these sorts of things. One thing I do want to pick up, and then I'm going to throw things over to Tanya and Bobbi, is that something's quite interesting about this idea of science, for instance. So as I'm not that kind of doctor, so I'm not a clinical doctor, but I'm a social psychologist. I was much more interested. I thought I was interested in clinical, and then I realized I had it all wrong. People aren't broken. Society is very disordered, and that's the thing we need to fix. And so for me, I guess, and this is personal, but there are lots of academics and researchers who think in a similar way. I don't find it scientifically interesting to know where autism is in the body, in the brain, and the same with ADHD and so on and so forth, because I want us to focus on, like say, the lived experience. And so I don't think scientifically it is helpful to debate the existence of somebody who has the PDA profile. That is not helpful. I want us, and I'm sure we probably would agree as a small group, that what we want is more work around how do we make and improve the environment so that those people who experience PDA are feeling less threat response, etc., etc. Like, I don't want to debate your existence. I think that's really unhealthy narrative for people. So I want us to focus on you all. You're real people. If I was a tactile person, I could poke you. I won't, but in real life, if I ever met you. But I don't find that helpful. So I'm going to throw it to Tanya and Bobbi.
I find that really bizarre, because they're all going, oh, science, but realistically, you've only got people's lived experience. It's like what we say about autistic experience. There is no autism. Autism was just some concept that was, created by some old white man looking at kids that looked or behaved the same and wrote lists or whatever. There's only really autistic experience. And I think the same needs to apply to PDA. It's absolutely bonkers. And realistically, we've only got the testimony of those that do have, that do resonate with what's characterized as a PDA profile. And you were saying as well about what is PDA, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that sometimes, especially in research, we can really silo it down and get really into the nitty gritty of what this is and what that is. And that's not real PDA. And I'm really careful about not doing that, because I think that you can only ever meet a person where they're at. And if at that time, that is the approach that works for them, then that's what we should be doing, rather than sitting there with clipboards going, this isn't PDA, that isn't PDA, And I think it's really dangerous as well, because the more research and kind of literature that's written on it, the more it seems to be getting like that. It's a smaller and smaller window. And I just think that, how do I say it in a nice, I'm just going to say it. It's in danger of becoming the new Asperger's syndrome in a way, I think, because they're trying to separate it from autistic experience. And I don't think that that's helpful for anybody in a community. And I also don't think it's helpful to say that it doesn't, it's definitely autistic experience. But at the end of the day, for me, PDA is a particular recipe of an autistic person that creates this thing that looks like PDA and the person experiences in line with other PDAs.
So, and I'm going to come to Bobbi. So even, I'm just going to sort of summarize, I guess, to some extent. So even if some of the argument that we have seen in the literature is that PDA, this pathological demand avoidance, exists outside of autistic people. Okay, fine. But that's like I say, as a relatively just autistic person, in quotation marks, everyone laugh, it's fine. Right, thank you. Oh no, I've lost my train of thought. Wait, don't. It's not, it's just like being ADHD. It's like you can have an ADHDer who really doesn't experience autistic experience. Like they are ADHD and they are not autistic. You can have an autistic person who is not ADHD, and then you can have somebody who is both. And they are a very different type of pastry. And so even if this thing called PDA exists outside of autistic experience, it still exists, right? And it still exists for autistic people who have that profile. And so, okay, let's focus on those people and how to support them, what works, what doesn't work, and just centering those voices. Chloe, shut up because you're not centering their voices. Bobbi.
Okay, so even though I did a degree in autism, I am so not academic. And I know for a fact that the research is narrowing things, and it seems to be, as Tanya said, limiting. And I can only go by my experience and of what I know to be demand avoided in me. And it can be quite different to what I hear other people talking about. But my youngest probably was my introduction to it and was diagnosed atypical autism spectrum because of this profile of exposure anxiety, meaning the excruciating sense of audience to one's own existence. And it's like the attention is the demand. So I'm quite interested in this idea of different, lack of a better term, manifestations of what demand avoidance is, because I don't think that in itself is even remotely looked at. And I think there are very many, depending on, like you said, the type of person. So my youngest is autistic and ADHD. So their demand avoidant, I automatically assume, is going to be radically different than from another autistic person, if that makes sense. Yeah. So for me, I'm interested in the research looking at, because I don't really care if it's outside of the autistic community. I really don't. Like that doesn't, like I don't care. Like there's no other way of putting it for me.
I mean, that's great. We just get more people to welcome in, don't we?
There's more, to me, it's whether or not it's the importance is the autistic experience of demand avoidance. Like that's way more important to me than this sort of whole debate that's out there that I know is raging out there with certain people about, whether it's autistic experience alone or not. I don't care. What I care about is making the world, as you said, Chloe, making the environment a better place to actually accommodate, more people with these different types. And I do believe there are varying different types of demand avoidance.
And I think, so Beck's saying here, wouldn't it be lovely for all just to know their neurological makeup, no matter what it is? And this is why I keep with this jokey thing of what kind of pie or pastry or whatever you want to end up describing yourself as. You could be mixed Play-Doh, right? It doesn't matter. And so Tanya, how have you described this before? You've said this before as well about how
so I think
it's not important to say
it's not
a person with autism. It's important to know they're autistic and they don't think in pictures and PDA and all these things, so that you've got an idea of.
It's a recipe for me. It's a basic recipe. So I work with like an awful lot of really, really traumatized autistic people. So for me, it's really important to know, so I know how to adjust how I approach them. So it's more about what can I do to help, rather than, oh, you don't tick this box and you don't tick that box. You know, it's a name that, so for me, things like dyspraxia, hyperphantasia, whether you think a picture, all that stuff, it's not because I want to categorize somebody. It's like, how can I help? How can I understand better? And I think that that's where we need to be coming at from a perspective when we're thinking about PDA. It's not about categorizing or being a self-proclaimed expert or making a career from research or trying to change. It's about, how can we understand this more so we can help more?
I have a few thoughts around this, if it's okay to share.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Tanya. I mean, when I have families come into a 12-week program that I run, they're looking for solutions. Most of the time they come into that program because they think I have the answers around how to get their child to go to school or how to help with toileting, and I definitely don't do that. I never, ever do that. I don't tell parents how to parent their children. I give information about my experience of PDA and what helps and what doesn't help, and they can go away with the information and they can use what works for them and throw away what doesn't. But what always happens is they come away with a different understanding of their child, a different understanding of their child's behaviour, and many of them end up identifying as autistic, the parents, which is no surprise to us, right? When I hear the community talk about, we need to know whether PDA is the autistic experience or not, I feel threatened. I feel threatened that someone's ripping apart my identity, because I have this understanding of myself that is so important to me, because so many of us as autistic people, my experience was that until I knew about my neurodivergent identity, in whatever capacity that looks like, I was suicidal. I didn't want to be here because I thought I was so inherently flawed. I experienced, sorry, I should have given a trigger warning then. Okay. I experienced such poor mental health and such poor, prolonged, chronic physical health, isolation, homelessness, being put in isolation at school, you know, family violence, addiction, all of those things that the autistic community, so many of us experience. And when I came to understand my identity, which is so important to me, I was able to make sense of my experience. And so when people start saying, well, no, we need to see whether PDA is not an autistic experience and it's separate, that makes me feel like we're walking down the Asperger's line. And I loathe hearing that, because I think we're going back to square one. We are setting up hierarchies. We're setting up functioning labels. It's such dangerous territory to go into. And so also when I hear people go, but are you really PDA or are you ADHD with executive functioning? I feel triggered by that, because I think, who cares, right? Who cares? Yeah. We are so individual. I mean, for me, it matters to me that I understand my identity. And I'm a person who, I love labels, because I need to categorize different parts of myself to learn more about those parts and support myself. But that's the point, isn't it? I mean, what you're saying, Tanya, about when we consult with children or adults and they need to be supported, it's information, and we get to connect with the individual based on the information we have about them. But we don't do what non-autistic professionals do. We don't use a generic framework, right? And most of the problem, I don't know what it's like in the UK and in the States. Well, I have a bit of an idea based on the families I work with, but in Australia, we have this this awful generic framework where people see a child and go, okay, autistic. When they're in the classroom, put a timer on their desk, make notes on the board and give them breaks.
Yeah.
We're not looking at the individual. We're looking at the word autism. And I hate that people are doing that with PDA. They're reading what's currently written. And what has done the most damage to me is textbook autism, and continues to, because when it's not written or formulated by autistic people, it's biased observation of autistic behaviour or PDA behaviour. People look at what's happening, make gross assumptions about it, go away and write this stuff down. Then they hand it out to parents whose children have just been identified neurodivergent, and parents walk away with that information. Educators walk away with that information. Academics, professionals in training walk away with that information and go, this is what autism is, this is what PDA is, and it does so much intergenerational damage and causes so much trauma that I think remaining suspended in this position where we have to know, is it an autistic experience? Is it its own thing? Is it this? Is it that? It's an individual experience. And for me, you know, people say, well, this is a diagnosis, it's not a personality. For me, it's my personality. It's central to my being, everything about
it's and it should be a protected characteristic. It is a protected characteristic. If you tell me you're gay, I don't need to watch you make out with another woman to prove it. If you tell me you're Muslim, I don't need you to watch to make sure that you never eat a bacon sandwich in your life to prove it to me. That is such, what's the word for the ignorance that comes from privilege? Like, people have the right to ask those questions of somebody about their own identity. What does it matter? And I found it really, really kind of mind-bogglingly offensive and nosy. And maybe that's the demand avoidance. I don't know, that people want to invalidate. People think that they have the right to invalidate people's lived experience. And, you know, the way that it's approached is very, very neurotypical, isn't it? Because they can only see the bigger picture. And when you're looking at neurodivergent individuals, you can't take a neurotypical approach, because each one of, you know, each part of that person's recipe produces a different result.
Can I've got so many, again, I'm just listening to Kristy, I was like, all the things. So a few things, I'm going to lose all of them now that I'm talking. Fantastic brain.
It's that ADHD, Chloe, that you've not got.
I need to get the pictures back. There was a good movie playing that was related to everything Kristy was saying and Tanya was saying. There was a bit about labels that I'm going to come back to, because that is important. Oh, okay, good. Right. So this debate that we are not having, others are having on behalf of lived experience, you know, people with that experience. The debate that it exists outside of autism, it exists, you know, it's not the same, but all this kind of stuff. What they are forgetting is every single experience we have as autistic people is human. Every single experience we have as ADHD people is human, etc., etc. It is in the human repertoire. And again, it has a different flavour when you mix it. So if PDA exists outside of autistic experience, okay, look into how to support those people with the lived experience of PDA that is not related to being innately neurodivergent like autistic or ADHD. That's fine. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the particular flavours that happen when you mix autistic, ADHD, PDA, etc., etc. And then, so again, scientifically, do not care. I don't find it interesting. I want to talk to people like yourselves, and you say, this thing does not help me. This thing does help me, for instance.
Monique talks about that as well, doesn't she? How that consistently autistic people, Schrodinger's autistic, you're either too autistic to be reliable, to report on your own experience, or not autistic enough to be taken seriously. And it's even worse with PDA. And I often, like me and Sai, because I know that Sai, Northern Autie, for everybody who's in the comments, who've probably seen him, we were talking about this for that conference that he did. We had to write a bit about his experience of PDA, and I was helping him put the words together. And it's just, you know, we talked about how PDAs are often canaries in the mine because they experience as a group, they are within our neurodivergent community, very much with me anyway, maybe not other people I can't speak on behalf of, but they're experiencing all the things that we moan about, that autistic people moan about to an extreme extent. Like PDA lived experience is completely undermined. You know, being and even like canaries in the mine for as far as autistic trauma is concerned, like sensory trauma. My experience of PDA is that they are much more susceptible to autistic trauma. They're much more sensitive. They're much more in tune. And that brings me around to another gripe that I've got about separating autism and PDA is the strategies. You were talking about textbook syndrome, Kristy.
Yeah.
This really annoys me. When people go, we can't use standard autistic strategies for PDAs. Well, actually, you should be using PDA strategies for autistic people, and then you probably wouldn't be creating masking. You probably wouldn't be, you know, making an environment for alexithymia to thrive. We probably wouldn't have like the degree of internalized ableism. Would be able to answer what we felt, what we wanted, and you'd probably save us from years and years of abuse because we didn't realize that behavioralist kind of approaches that we've been subject to actually made us susceptible to that. So that's another gripe that I've got with it as well. So actually, all this separation of PDA and autistic experience, I would say needs to come closer, not further apart.
Yeah. I just hate the word strategies. It's so triggering.
Oh, it really does my head in, because to me, that's
to come back. Sorry, to come back to, and I think Bobbi. No, it's fine. And I think Bobbi, because Bobbi is very much connected with going into schools, etc., is that thing of a lot of autism strategies don't work for lots of autistic people either.
Yes,
because it's like the thing of, well, we use the zones of regulation. So, like, how is that autistic person feeling based on this picture, these colour pictures? And I'm like, well, it depends. Are they alexithymic? And then other things that they might do. We're going to do imagination techniques for these autistic people. Okay.
And it makes me crazy.
Are they affants and can't think in pictures? So what you're asking them to do is impossible. Like, they're not knowing, again, the profile. Sorry, Bobbi, because you will see this often as well.
It's literally so painful to me, because I'll walk into a place when they ask me to come in and they want me to consult with a specific or a kid in the class type situation, and they automatically start. It's like I haven't even said a word, and they'll come out with, well, you can see we're dealing with PACs, and you can see the visual thing on the board, and we're doing this and we're doing that, and I'm looking at them going, can you tell me about the child?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this is the thing that's missing in school. This is the thing that schools may be crazy right now. In the UK, they're underfunded, archaic systems that are not safe places for anybody who's neurodivergent, in my opinion. Okay, this is purely my opinion. And I'm not saying this in a workspace. Okay, it's personal. But what they're doing is they're making it worse, and we're having so many children leave, and you sort of look at them and you say, well, did you look at the child, and did you see what the individual needs of that child was? Because if you look at the child and you see what their individual needs are, then reasonable adjustments are actually very, very easy. Very easy. On training that side of it, I did a conference recently for about a couple of hundred TAs. And afterwards, I went through the entire presentation, did not announce my neurodivergency, right? At all, until the very end. I had about every session I did, I had somebody come up to me and go, wow, never would have thought you were autistic. I'm like, well, that's why I just did what I did. You get it? I'm like, I'm trying to change your perceptions, because it is all very, very much boxed in, categorized. This is how we treat autistic children in school. Absolutely. You know what I mean? And Tanya can tell you that, because she deals with it also every day.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can't go too much into it, but like the lack of understanding and knowledge that is around and it starts with education, but it's not just education. We're talking up to forensic psychiatrists, consultants, like everything. It literally is causing death
Yes.
on a week by week basis of serious case reviews. It is disturbing.
Yeah.
Because, and you ask them, so what about double empathy? What about monotropism?
Yes.
And these are the highest qualified people that you can actually get in front of.
Yeah.
And it's not there. The knowledge hasn't moved on from SBC. I won't say what popped into my head. I've just got visions of Bennett. Can you remember the Christmas thing when he got all of his different names for Simon Baron Cohen? Sorry, visual flashback. But yeah, it's not moved on.
Later.
Yeah, we'll tell you later. But it's not moved on from there, and it's really alarming. And I think as well that when you throw strategies at teachers and say, do this strategy, do that strategy, it's almost used as a kind of excuse to remove the human element.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So they're going, but I'm using all these strategies and I've given him a timer and I've done this and I've done that. And they can clearly see that this child is in distress and experiencing trauma, but it's okay because you've got these strategies and you did 3-day training and the forcing the kids into school. Oh yeah, well, it's normal for autistic kids because it said so in this strategy or on this training. And I think that you can't effectively work with neurodivergent children, specifically autistic children, unless you have the core understanding of autistic theory and how that interacts and how that is the engine that drives that forward. And that's what's missing. And there are companies out there that are charging thousands to package up strategies when really I want to go, here's what monotropism is, 5 minutes. Here's what double empathy is, 5 minutes. Here's sensory trauma. Here are the 8 senses. I mean, Kieran does it. Kieran does it over 7 weeks.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
this, the example that real quick. The example that I gave of you have to understand these TAs at a conference, that was it for the year. And that was put on by the school because they wanted to give them a little bit more knowledge, right? Because the knowledge right now, from what I know in schools, TAs and teachers, they're not getting a full day of any kind of training whatsoever, let alone on
neither a psychiatrist and counselling and social care and child protection.
Right, and throw a PDA in there on top of it. And they're looking at all their strategies, and they're looking at all their stuff, and they're saying, but this doesn't fit. Why isn't it fit? And suddenly it becomes a child situation. And that's kind of what I dealt with. And
it never comes back to, okay, so let's bin the strategies and let's look at what's worked for this individual child. And let's keep doing that.
Yeah.
So it's not working where they're coming into a busy classroom and they don't want to be there. Don't put them in one. It's not rocket science, is it?
Yeah.
It's not working when we are not following their interest-led autonomy. Okay, let's make it interesting. Let's follow their lead. I mean, why do they need so-called experts and strategies to do that? Anyway, I'm going to stop ranting. I'm on a massive
thing. Sorry.
I just wanted to bring it back. No, it's fine because I've got 2 more kind of interesting things that I think is going to set us off, which is great. So I just wanted to mention about the labeling thing. And the thing is, a lot of people think that as a social psychologist, I would hate labels, right? Because people misunderstand that labels can be positive, neutral, or negative. But we usually only call, or other people usually only call something a label when they think it's inherently negative. Yeah. And so the way I describe it and how you've described it, Kristy, is that there is a huge difference between being labelled by outsiders who, without lived experience, as a person with pathological demand avoidance versus identifying with your lived experience as a PDA. Those are 2 very different things in the way that we have argued that I was labelled, some of us with an assessment and an official diagnosis in quotation marks. We have been labelled as people with autism spectrum disorder, depending on when you were diagnosed, actually, because obviously the diagnoses have changed over the years because, oh, look, people keep changing their mind about what this thing called autism is. Anyway, so we were all largely, if we've been diagnosed, labelled or societally labelled as people with autism spectrum disorder. But for us, we are autistic people, and that is our identity. And they are so worlds apart. And it's frustrating that some researchers still don't get that. They don't get there's a huge difference between being a person with PDA and a PDA, for instance. On my soapbox about labels, because you're right, human brains, based on the way we have evolved, naturally categorize. It is a natural process of the evolved human brain, because we do so much and we take in so much sensory information, and so our brains naturally categorize. What is not necessarily natural is prejudice and bias, right? And that's where the issue comes in, and that is down to the individual and lots of other things as well. So categorization and labeling isn't actually inherently negative, only when people place that negativity on it. So that rant over. I love it. We're all just ranting in little like monologues. It's fantastic. So I want to ask, why is this profile so gate kept? Because it is, I would argue, much more gate kept than autistic experience. Now, that's not to say, I want to be very clear, I recognise there are so many people who don't get recognised as autistic because of the gatekeeping. So I want to be clear, I'm not trying to compare here, but I am saying that PDA feels like a very gate-kept identity. So Kristy, any thoughts on why?
Yeah, I think there's a range of factors. I think, you know, for the PDA that has a strong sense of, I think it's a threat response, personally, around people watering down their identity. I've heard PDAs talk about this. I think because it's so hard to be understood in the first place as a PDA, and then when other people who aren't resonating with the PDA profile are coming in, or identifying as PDAs, are coming in and saying, oh yeah, I have that. Oh yeah, that's me. That's definitely me. And then it kind of gets lost, I guess. I think that's one aspect of it. The person is threatened that their identity is being watered down. The other thing is there are particular autistic researchers in the community who want to disprove that it exists. And so there is a call for the research to tighten up and be more specific so that we can prove it's a thing. It is really gate kept. It really, really is. Yeah, I think it comes from that. I don't know, like when I think about people feeling threatened that their PDA identity is being watered down, I kind of can't help but think that there's more involved in that around the person's identity. There may be other things going on, because for me, I don't really care so much who identifies in whatever way they do. I'm secure about what my identity is and who I am and how I show up in the world and how I support myself. I don't need to own PDA. In fact, I cringe when people use the word expert, or people use the word, I don't know, just hierarchical words, you know. I think we are all experts on ourselves and our own experience, but the gatekeeping makes me feel sick. And I think one thing in particular is I've had other autistic people probably coming at this from a place of curiosity, but it is so, I don't even know the word. It makes me so incredibly sad. They come and ask me about my PDA experience and they question it. And so if we think about how when we tell neurotypical people or non-autistic people we're autistic, and they go, but how are you autistic? You know, everybody does that, but I do. And you're sitting there sometimes thinking, yeah, because you're autistic. But that happens in the autistic community with PDAs a lot. A lot of autistic people will say, so then explain to me how PDA is different. Yeah, but isn't that just autistic inertia? And they're valid questions, right? But they're so invalidating and so, it makes me feel so small. And I don't know that people understand that's what they're doing, but it's no different to people who aren't autistic invalidating our autistic experience. And I see it happen all the time. I think I've seen so many people, autistic people, that I really respected and looked up to and really valued what they do, write public posts about PDA does not exist. It's just a new label introduced to create hierarchies. And I think, oh my God, it breaks my heart, because I think you're telling me that my experience isn't real, and you can't do that. So I think there's so many elements in there that people start to, part of the human experience for so many of us is that we then go, no, there's trauma associated. No, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. No, people are not going to tell me that PDA doesn't exist. And so we start going out on our own and saying, that's not PDA. And it's because of your talking about that experience that these people don't believe it exists. And I think that's what's happening with the research at the moment, with the feedback to organisations like the PDA Society. Get a lot of complaints from people saying, this isn't what PDA is. You need to tighten up your research because everyone's saying it doesn't exist because these people over here are talking about PDA in a way that it's not PDA. So there's that kind of gatekeeping as well. And I think a lot of it comes down to personal experiences and the way that we're handling being invalidated as well.
I think it's fair to say we need to stop doing that. So I mean, not you folks, because obviously you're the ones who are feeling it, but we need to stop that, because we wouldn't say to somebody, why do you think you're gay? You're not gay like this other person that I know who is gay in this way, right? Yeah. And so on and so on and so on. Now, that is not to say that obviously gay people don't experience real stigma, prejudice and discrimination. So that's not obviously what I'm trying to do here. What I'm saying is we must stop. So this is to everybody who's listening, if this doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to you. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. We have to stop. We need to be listening and respecting people's lived experience. And Aucademy, we ourselves can be better at this, because, we're very much about gentle educating. And I've made it clear from the start, people will be coming to Aucademy from different places in their journey, whether it's their personal journey as a neurodivergent person, or they're coming to learn about somebody they care about or they work with, etc. And we need to be gentler with those people, because it is hard. It's very triggering to hear people coming into those spaces using person first language, etc., etc. It's really, really hard, but we have to meet people where they are. We have to hold space. Because I made a blog about the 6 common reactions of autistic discovery, and they're only the common reactions. They're not to say everyone experiences them, or that you'll experience any of them at all, or you might experience all of them simultaneously, etc., etc. But what frustrated me, because some of those common reactions that I have seen, that's why I put them together, because I'm seeing them in hundreds and hundreds of people I've supported over the last few years, is some of them are negative. Some of them are, I've gone off a completely different tangent, I don't know why, but some of those reactions are, but I'm not autistic like those, in quotation marks, low functioning autistic people. And I got some negativity on Twitter. Facebook, it did fine. Twitter, we know what Twitter's like. And I got, this is bad, this is ableist, blah, blah. No, this is us respecting that people will be coming into those discovery journeys, feeling and internalizing that ableism, and we have to hold space for those people. Otherwise we drive them away. We have to be holding space for whatever PDA looks like, for whoever that person is. So stop it, people. We have to scoop them all. We scoop. This is what we do. Okay. I want to flag. Sorry. I was
No,
getting
I was
excited by what you were
We
saying.
were just
and
all
I-
nodding at you on your little
Well,
rant.
no,
I love it
yeah,
when you get on a rant.
Oh, and Sai, so Northern Naughty here. Whether it exists biologically or not, if a community experienced something, then it exists socially. And that is really important as well. So this is, again, why I moved very much away from clinical. I don't care if we find this thing called autism, if we find in the body, in the brain, in the DNA, or this thing called schizophrenia, and so on and so on. We work with and support the people who are alive and living and experiencing those things. And in terms of the gatekeeping, I hope that Kieran, if you're still here, this is okay to put this and talk about this. So I think this is really important. Sorry, it's going to take up a bit of the screen. So Kieran says, I find it difficult to understand why those researchers that are deconstructing and badly the PDA narrative through the nuisance criteria, that might mean more to you than it does me, I'm afraid, are doing it. Okay, are doing it by differentiating it, i.e. PDA, from and comparing it to the autism diagnostic criteria, when we all know that the autism criteria is enormously flawed.
Yes.
And again, this is coming back to this issue. We work with people. We don't work with theories.
And I've got another addition to this on like what's happening within research and you know, new publications and information that's coming around. We've, you know, when we look at research, isn't one of Nick Chown's criteria is like something around how is this useful to the people that it's talking about, you know? So when they're saying that something doesn't, you know, something doesn't exist or something is trauma based, like say, for example, that, you know, there's a lot of argument that like PDA is the intersection between trauma, ADHD and autism. Now, I got to say that I agree. But what I think the problem is people really misunderstand what autistic trauma is and how that plays a part in an autistic person's life. But when people say that, they're perpetuating parent blame. They're perpetuating FII, which is a huge fabricated and induced illness, which is a huge problem that I deal with on a daily basis. And it's devastating for families. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. You know, they're digging up the old refrigerator mother narratives, attachment disorder, all of these horrible, horrible narratives. So actually, when people are doing this research, they're doing it without any awareness of the social implications that is going to have on real life families. And that sort of research, right, up and down the country, there are literally dead children. And I read the plethora of information and I go, that's PDA. That is PDA.
Yes.
That's PDA. And that has been missed all along. And this young person is now traumatized and now they're no longer here. And you've got a grieving family, you know, every day. And it just, and there's like, you know, and then comes up and down the country. Well, we've read research that says it doesn't exist, so we don't accept it. And then they just completely disregard it. And the thing is, right, we're in a needs-based structure. So I just sit there and argue, do you know what? Would you like me to call it PDA? Would you like me to call it a demand avoidant profile? Or would you like me to list every particular aspect of this person's autistic profile that would usually be covered under PDA? But the problem is, normally when they go, oh, we just don't accept PDA, that's it then, you know? And it's really damaging. Like the researchers have such a massive responsibility because they shape how it is understood. And that really goes into people's living rooms. It you know, it sleeps with their children in bed at night or in the morning when they're being dragged into school and nobody can tell what's wrong with them. And it must be mum, or children are, you know, suicidal at 5 years old, but CAMS don't recognize PDA. And it just really infuriates me because I don't care whether some researcher has decided whether it exists or not based on a flawed autism diagnostic criteria. It is a particular profile, which is a profile of an autistic person that exists. And this is the result. And this is what we do with it. And that really, really annoys me because this sort of research is damaging. Anyway, rant over, sorry.
It's the thing that stops parents. It's the thing that stops everybody from having the ability to support their children in the way that those children need to be supported. Because when you talk to families about some of the accommodations that PDA kids really need, like recovery from school, from trauma as a result of their school experience, when we talk to families about allowing them time in their room, giving them months, sometimes years in recovery, that's a privilege, because so many families are linked into a system that threatens to remove their children if they don't force them into school, that threatens to send in social services to put together unrealistic and abusive plans for them that they don't have a choice around whether they follow or not. And this doesn't just contribute to that immediate family. This perpetuates the cycle of intergenerational neurodivergent trauma. It perpetuates addiction. It perpetuates
mental health
much
problems. And then it does turn into mum's anxiety and mum's mental health. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's absolutely sickening, but it saves the government an awful lot of money. And it really annoys me. Like, literally, this is day in, day out for me.
We're going to be dealing with the same. You heard about the white paper. We're going to be dealing with the same situation where if that white paper for education goes through, schools decide if children are allowed to be homeschooled or not. Really? Yeah. Schools decide? I mean, we're going to be facing...
I'm sorry, but I can comfortably say that I have never met a professional that has the same level of understanding as my neurokin and my colleagues in regards to autism. And we don't consider ourselves particularly gifted in that area. It's just common sense to us. And these people are in control of clinical commissioning groups and entire social care sectors and entire school facilities. It's terrifying.
Highly.
Anyway, I went off on a tangent, an ADHD tangent somewhere.
We keep apologising for our amazing, like, monologuing rants, but actually it's beautiful. It's what we do. It's just monologue rant, monologue rant, monologue rant, monologue rant. That's right.
Yeah, and it means that parents actually don't seek support.
Exactly.
It frequently happens, and it's awful, because I'll do like webinars and presentations on institutionalized parent care at Blame, for example, and they'll say, you know, I'm really struggling. Should I approach? And honestly, I have to say, no, please don't. Please don't do that. You know?
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
And then you think about the fact that, you know, we're white presenting people having this experience, and, you know, like the experience of Black, Brown, Indigenous families just in Australia.
Disabled, yeah. We have that here as well. I support a number of Black and Brown people with learning difficulties that are embroiled in this fee child protection narrative and the way that it is allowed to spiral. Because I tell you what, nobody would ever say some of the things that the unqualified people say to those parents.
Yeah.
And there's no accountability because it's all so behind closed doors.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to what you were saying, Chloe, earlier about meeting people where they are. I think there's pockets of the autistic community that mean really, really well and are very staunch about language and what autistic people need and how we accommodate people to thrive. But there's also the reality that there are people whose children are in particular therapies that we know traumatize autistic people, and we have to support them while they're in it. We have to support those families given the situation that they have, because they do not have the privilege of withdrawing their children from particular therapies or schools. And so many of us overlook the fact that these people really need support too, rather than shaming.
I don't know how you do it. I've been very lucky that's not been my experience. I've never had a client whose child was in what I call compliance training in any way, shape, or form. So I've been really lucky, and
I understand the trauma place. Yeah, it's a really difficult thing because, you know, And Karen often says, you know, tell me what an untraumatized autistic person looks like. So it's really difficult because you've got trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma.
Yeah.
So I understand it, but also, yeah.
I mean, Kristy, you're right. They still need the support. And that's actually been a little bit of an eye-opener for me. You know, what would I do in that situation if a client came to me? And being hyper empathetic as I am, I want to help them. So I thank you for pointing that out, like legitimately.
Yeah.
I think it depends for me as well. It depends on who it is. Like, I will not tolerate an NT in an NHS meeting who keeps misidentifying me as a person with autism. Yes. I will not forgive that, because I've already told them it's on my Zoom thing. It tells you how to address me, etc. But when I'm in a space where I'm just in training and it's a bunch of NT professionals and they are wanting to learn and they keep using the wrong language, or what I would class as language that I'd rather they didn't use. Okay, my eye might twitch a little bit.
I have a little bit of cringe.
But all I keep doing is you just model it. We have to model it, and people will pick it up or they don't. We model it. So I'm just, you know, they're like, yes, because of people with autism. I'm like, yeah, those autistic people. Yeah. You know, because it's just, you keep doing that. And eventually, I mean, sometimes it is quite nice. They'll be that they stop themselves and they'll go, oh, sorry, I mean. And you're like, oh, lovely. Right. Didn't have to like lecture you kind of thing. It's really nice. I want to now play devil's advocate. I like this game, devil's advocate. So this thing that we're describing, this demand avoidance, isn't that just normal demand avoidance? So this is me playing devil's advocate, because can we pick apart a little bit? So for instance, if I ask, because I know how much you love and understand better than I do monotropism, for instance, I'm going to ask, Tanya, can you tell us maybe what autistic demand avoidance, because again, everyone who's watching and listening, when we are talking about demand avoidance, that's what outsiders are seeing.
Yeah.
So autistic demand avoidance.
Right, how does one decide what is normal of demand avoidance and what is not? We are all so individual with so many different profiles. I mean, it's all right to categorize it and go, oh, well, you know, that's just a monotropic split, or that's just a bit of this, or that's just a burnout. But actually, you can't actually define what's going on the inside. So I think we should, you know, we're shoveling sand, aren't we, on that one, to try and define something as normal demand avoidance. I would say the fundamental difference, and really the only kind of the two things really that PDA is to me, one is the difference is that when an autistic person without the PDA profile is experiencing demand avoidance, you whip back the demands and it subsides somewhat. PDA, it doesn't, never will. And PDAers, I love them. They just have this energy. They just, how do you explain it? They just have this energy. It's like they have this innate instinctive awareness of the co-regulation and how to control it in a really delicious way. Does that even make sense?
Yes.
Just this, they got you. Like, they can almost, if it was an aura, they'd know what it was and what it read all over your face.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's PDA in a nutshell for me.
Okay.
And anything on top of that is just adding fluffy bits on to kind of, you know, everything else is icing.
I'm going to ask, I don't know if I'm pointing, I'm probably pointing in the wrong direction. So I'm just going to point twice. Okay, you do that for me, fine. Thank you. So then I'm going to ask Bobbi in a second, if that's okay, what attention differences or this ADHD demand avoidance potentially is from the inside. Again, think of demand avoidance in quotation marks, because that's what outsiders see. And then we can, if Kristy has got any further thoughts on what is the difference when we're talking about PDA, so-called demand avoidance. Okay, so before I move over to Bobbi, I just wanted to add, so for me, as a largely just autistic person, everyone laughs, it's fine. is, if for me, demand avoidance, it looks like demand avoidance to others, but it's inertia. It is, I'm stuck. I have been sitting at my desk doing whatever work. I've become absorbed. I've got that monotropic flow. I cannot break away from the thing I am doing. And I know I need the bathroom because I've got heightened interoception, something I've learned about my profile. And so I know that I need to go to the bathroom, but I'll sit here for 4 hours. And to outsiders, that could look like I'm avoiding demands. I'm avoiding anything else other than what I'm doing, but it's not. I don't. It's I'm stuck. I am in inertia, and that.
It's the experience of threat that comes with that. So if you were like in inertia, and like quite often we'll sit here after lives for about 3 hours later, and they were like, "Oh my Lord, I really need to go to sleep, or I really need to pee," But it's the experience of threat. It's that I can't do this thing.
And when you're talking about PDA, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I thought you meant the inertia thing. I was like, no.
Oh, no. So, PDA is all those things. It's all the things like, ADHD, because I don't know about anybody else, but I've never met a PDA that doesn't fit criteria for ADHD. Kristy may correct me.
No, I say the same thing. I say the exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're saying, oh, is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? Actually, I want to go, it's all of those things chucked in, and the threat response. And you can't, I don't think that we should necessarily be separating it too much from autistic experience. And maybe it is the fact that it's all of the things thrown in that creates the threat.
And that's the thing. So while I'm talking about, I'm unnaturally, I guess, somewhat hypothetically talking about the different types of demand avoidance, whilst recognizing that they could all be in the same person, and that could also make it appear and it be experienced in a different way. If you are, for instance, PDA, autistic, ADHD, then what to outsiders looks like demand avoidance, again, will be particular to that person. So this is a very hypothetical, if we're pretending that we could pick them apart. So Bobbi, what do you, if we were to describe what looks to outsiders like ADHD demand avoidance, what might we say that actually is?
Well, to me, that's really hard, because I can only tell you the type of demand avoidance my youngest deals with. My own is really different, and it's more internal. So, for example, I can't do phone calls at all. Like, the phone rings, I will lose it. It's also things like every time I'm supposed to go do something, like even today, there's a real part of me that wants to cancel every time. And it doesn't go away, and I was an actress. I acted on stage, and before I went on stage, every time I would sit there and think of ways to get out of it. So I don't know if it's an ADHD sort of demand avoidance, or if it's a whole wrapped up thing for me, and I know for a fact that masking helped me kind of blind it a little bit, if that makes sense. I can mask as something and then do the thing, but it's still there, and it's always there. And even while I'm doing it for the first couple of minutes, it's still there. Like, I want to end it immediately. I don't know how else to sort of describe it. For my youngest, it's all about any sort of perceived attention at all. Any. Doesn't matter where it's from. Any perceived attention, and it never goes away. Walking down the street, automatically assuming every single person knows exactly what they're thinking and feeling. Being very hyper empathetic and not realizing that the emotions coming in are not yours, they're somebody else's. And how to deal with all of that. And that's all based on attention, if that makes sense. So it's very kind of different. So I'm kind of with Tanya, and I'm kind of with you all saying, like, it's all the things. And I don't know how to sort of separate them, if that makes sense.
I would also say, ADHD helps you sometimes overcome that avoidance as well. Because does anybody else have the F it button where they just throw themselves into something and then panic about it later as well? So that, everything's always framed as a negative. It's like we avoid these things because of ADHD. We avoid these things because of inertia. But actually, ADHD means that I'm sometimes able to deal with really difficult situations there and then because of the impulsiveness and just do the thing. But like 2 days after this live, I'll be running through every word that I said, like panicking about everything that I said wrong, and did I offend anybody, and what did I do wrong, and did I look stupid, was I moving around, you know? So but if it wasn't for the ADHD element, I don't think I would be riddled with anxiety and never achieve anything.
I agree with you, because I think it was my ADHD that allowed me to act, because that idea of throw yourself into something, because, you know, the audience is there. What am I supposed to do? All of a sudden close everything down? The pressure was enormous. So you're right. I would literally just chuck myself into it.
But there is the element for me, if it's somebody else's perceived expectation that I will do this thing, then I find that offensive. I hate that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, how do you separate things? And I think as well that goes back to the gatekeeping thing that we were talking about, Kristy, as well, because it's been so defined and siloed down to what is and isn't PDA and gatekept, that maybe there are an awful lot of people there, probably myself included, that like, yeah, no, I've got 2 PDA children, they've got 2 different fathers, it's probably me, but we're like, oh, I don't want to offend anybody, you know, I resonate with that, but I'm not quite sure. And then you've got Sai in the comments going, you're a raging PDA. And I'm like, oh, no, I can't really say that because I feel like I'm stealing somebody else. You know, so it's really difficult. It's a big mess.
That makes me sad when people have that narrative, when they're afraid to identify however they need to identify because they feel like imposters. I mean, how did we even get there? Like, I relate to some of what's being said, and I don't relate to some of what's been said about demand avoidance here. For me, anything that threatens to compromise my freedom, my autonomy, me being like this with people, places, and things, causes me to experience a bolt of sometimes rage, but it's actually intense anxiety, but I experience it as rage because it's my fight flight going off. It's like my brain going, get the hell out of there. But I have to live in flow all of the time, and I don't get a choice about that, and it's incredibly frustrating. So for me, there might be 1,000 things I'm really excited about doing, but I have to consistently accept you're just going to have to wait until the moment comes where your neurobiology allows you to do this thing. It's interesting because you're talking, Tanya, you were saying about ADHD giving you that ability to do the things. For me, that's my PDA. That's that strong determination.
I don't know where it starts, because when you're talking about constantly being in flow, that is literally how I have to work. So I can only really do work when I'm massively socially motivated because of the sense of justice to do it. And, you know, sorry, this is really personal, but I've like got my desk shoved in a tiny corner of my living room instead of in the office, so I can keep the laptop open. So should that kind of ever come up, it's there and I can go into it and out of it whenever I want, because I cannot work with the demand that I must do that then at this time. I must wake up at 8 a.m. But what I can do is sit there watching the TV, drinking my coffee, and have a nice little thought process pop into my head and then just tap away. I can't work outside of that. I cannot do it. I can't do it at all.
I will literally shut down in conversations with people if something happens that's a demand. I will feel myself shut down, and it's like a complete shutdown, and I will have to say, I need to leave this conversation now. And that feels humiliating for me sometimes because it can happen at any time. The intrusive thoughts, they are rife. And I think a lot of people think that, see, another thing about PDA for me is I come across as really confident and really cocky and really quirky and funny. That's the PDA energy for me. What, you know, you were talking about that flavor, that energy. That's something that people think about me is, oh, she's so different from other PDA adults in the community because she's not rude to people, or she's not, she's more patient. I have to mask the crap out of myself to be able to support families. And I am triggered 5,000 times in a millisecond, you know, but I have, as an adult, along the way, developed a toolkit to support myself so that I don't hold other people responsible for my demand avoidance or my triggers. And I don't have this unrealistic expectation that people will have to change around me all the time because, you know, within reason, of course, because I might be triggered or because I'm a PDA. Don't talk to me like that because I won't handle it. I, as much as I can, take responsibility for my experience, but I also let people know how they can help me in connection. Yeah. But PDA, I have positive identity around it, but it is bloody hard to live with as well. It's bloody hard. And I think I have the outrageous behaviors. I have the, you know, when someone puts a demand on me and I fall down here and I need to behave in a really outrageous way to bring myself back up here or to overcompensate so I'm up here with this demand thing. I have all the same characteristics as a PDA child. I really, really do. But I've developed a toolkit. And so I think it is hard to define what PDA is for me because I also actively support myself through all of those barriers that I experience. I have to constantly feed myself sensory information that is new to throw a spanner in the works so my PDA brain doesn't pick up on sequences of events that lead to demand avoidance. And I don't know whether I'm making sense or not, but change everything around me all the time because if my brain recognizes patterns, I can't do anything. I become frozen. So there are things I do to support myself that I don't even really think about anymore that you know, when I remember to talk about it, people go, oh, wow, that's really bizarre. And I go, oh, yeah, I guess it is. But I actively seek out ways to support myself.
And that all comes back to the fundamental importance of people not gatekeeping our lived experiences and our identities, because it sounds like it, and correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, did a lot of that working this stuff out and what potentially works for you and what doesn't, and this toolkit you said for yourself, which is obviously personal to you, did that largely come about from recognizing that you experience that PDA profile, would you say, or did it exist before?
Oh, no. Learning about PDA for me, taking it seriously, paying attention to how I respond to my environment and having it reframed is what allowed me to support myself. And this is what's important, isn't it? Allowing people to unravel and reframe and unlearn those experiences. Because that question that you asked before about the thing you asked Tanya about what's autism and demand avoidance, NT, I hate saying neurotypical because I don't really know if it exists, but non-autistic professionals would call that non-preferred tasks, you know, use really pathologizing ableist language like that. Demand avoidance is just a child using autism as an excuse to avoid their non-preferred tasks. Everyone has bloody non-preferred tasks. That's a human rite of passage. But yeah, I think a lot of people, when they come into diagnosis or identification, the information they have is the NT version. So they go, oh, I'm just really crap at this and I'm just a really bad person and I just can't do non-preferred tasks and I need more supports to help me get over myself. And no. When you learn about yourself, when you listen to lived experience, you go, actually, this is disabling because I'm disabled, and this is a real experience, and I can support myself, and maybe I don't have to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's the game changer.
And that really resonated because, you know, all of us in our own ways work with families and consult with people and people that are understanding an autistic experience, regardless of where they are in the journey. And I can speak for me exactly with what you said, and we do it for ourselves as well, because we're always battling the internalized ableism. That never goes away. It just gets less. We become more aware of it. But when people come to us, it's like we never tell them how to get their child to do something ever. It is always so all I do is reframe their understanding of what autistic experience is and paint it from a perspective of the autistic person and make things logically make sense. And we do that for ourselves as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you're quite right, because it doesn't, I've said this to somebody recently. So I've been delivering consults since 2020, but I've been working with neurodivergent people for a lot longer. And it actually doesn't matter why they come to me. Whatever reason, the autistic person themselves or their family or with the young person, et cetera, doesn't matter why or what reason they come to me, whatever they think that they're asking for, you know, I want to stop masking, I want to do this, I want to be able to do, you know, and I'm like, right, what I can do is help you learn your profile, because you won't, like I didn't know all these amazing things, what it could mean to be autistic, is learn your profile, communicate that profile, and communicate boundaries. That is what we all potentially could do with. None of this like strategies, etc. It all comes when you learn your profile, and nobody really helps us. We all know this. Nobody really helps us. And what you said as well, Kristy, which is, this is the key thing, isn't it? This is going back to this whole thing. The gatekeeping must stop, because then you can't learn your profile. Because like many of us here, I didn't recognize I was autistic, again, largely because I had the audacity to be signed female at birth. So I was missed, even though I was clearly autistic. Just look at pictures of me as a child, and etc. So I was 32, and the reason I recognised wasn't for the psychology degree that I did, because all I learned about was small white boys. It was because I saw a TED talk by a female autistic person, and I still doubted myself. And then I went and looked into the autistic community, because I'd already, my whole background was already neurodiversity. So I was quite savvy that I was lucky to avoid the mountains of nonsense and dangerous and damaging narrative. Everything, and I would say 98, maybe even 99% of what I have learned about myself as an autistic person and all the different people I've supported and whatnot, 98% has come from the community.
Yeah.
That is why we can't be gatekeeping. This is why we can't be gatekeeping with the research. This is why we can't be gatekeeping in the community, because I learned about myself, which means I could learn about other people, which means I can help other people do and avoid the dangerous stuff, or actually try and reduce the impact of the dangerous stuff that they've actually had to experience. And all of that came from, masking, Kieran Rose. I'm going to learn about masking and burnout. I've learned that from Kieran Rose. Or I'm going to learn about this from this other advocate. And I'm going to learn about this, and meeting lots of autistic people and finding out some of them don't think in pictures. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
How does your brain work? Because mine only thinks like a movie. And then that sent me off on this amazing thing of like, that's just mind blowing. And now that's what I want to know about the person in front of me, because it impacts so much. So yes, we've got to stop gatekeeping. I don't mean us here. If you're here, I'm probably like echo chamber. So take this information elsewhere. But we need to scoop. Okay, because we had lots of comments and responses actually to my key question. So we usually get comments, which is lovely, but I think this is really resonating, and maybe because there's so little. And obviously, if you haven't already, people hopefully have, go and see obviously Kristy's stuff anyway. We've also got Jodie, I think, was in the comment section at some point as well. You've got Tigger. There are not enough people, so that's maybe why we're getting a lot of conversation around this topic. So the key question I asked right at the start was, Hi everyone. What does PDA mean to you? So there's actually quite a lot of people who responded. So I'm not necessarily, if you want to pick any of these, not pick apart because they're people's lived experience, that's not what I mean, but have a discussion around any of them, feel free. But I just want to make sure these people feel seen and heard, basically. So Carol here says, I'm sure my son is PDA, but my being told they won't diagnose my son. Oh, okay. So this is, sorry, I forgot that Sai and Ben have also been pinning other people's comments, not just related to my question. I didn't look at what that was. Actually, do any of you have any?
No, I don't think it matters,
advice?
Carol. I think that's a pretty standard response, sadly. And look, a lot of the families that I am in community with really get stuck on, oh, I'm still not sure if my child's a PDA or not, so I'm not sure what to do about it. It doesn't matter. It's about focusing on the individual, because part of this process when we're supporting our children is that through that system of navigating systems, we can become disconnected from our children, disconnected from our intuition. So I encourage parents to prioritize connection with your child and observing what helps them and what doesn't help, and building on that.
I would also add to that in reference to, because I have a lot of clients that also this type of situation has happened, and I said, you don't have to say the word. You're explaining the support that your child needs. So if they don't even want to acknowledge it, whatever,
it doesn't matter.
You can still go ahead and teach those people, that are in education supporting your child, what works for your child.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's just wordplay, whether you choose to characterize this, whether you choose to say PDA, whether you choose to say demand avoidant profile, whether you choose to list the individual support needs that your child has or evidence them via SOL, OT, etc. It doesn't matter, what name we give it. We could call it fluffy pink rainbows if you want. It's still going to be the same thing.
Yeah, because years ago when mine was young, exposure anxiety, there was one person talking about it in Australia who's a very, very good friend of mine at the time as well. But nobody understood it. So there was no way of getting it diagnosed. And obviously now I know it as a demand avoidance, but I had to teach the people that were working with my child how to deal with him, because at the end of the day, they were getting kicked. I mean, literally. Kicked in the shins because they were just triggering constantly, So once they finally learned, how to support and how to do it properly, i.e. don't call on the child in the middle of a class. Kind of simple.
But this is the thing, even if you think your child is autistic, you're not just going to tell if you know anything about autistic experience, you as a parent are not just telling a teacher that your child is autistic. What you're actually doing is trying to inform that person as much about their individual support needs.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter whether it's autistic, ADHD, PDA, it's all individual.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, going off again.
That's fine. So these are more what people say it might mean for them. So this person, Marissa, PDA for me means I need autonomy. So just wanted, I wanted these people to just feel seen and heard. I think I've got this right. So Hill, Jolly, my parts come out to play at different times depending on the environment. So to quote Chloe, my pie isn't just one ingredient. Sometimes PDA is in the pie, sometimes not. I need autonomy, and that's what PDA means to me. That need and whether I have autonomy at the core of what is happening.
I think that's what people miss for when they say control. I don't believe it's about control at all. It's about
I don't think it's control. I think it's not trusting other people to let them be in control.
Yeah. And it's also autonomy. And that resonates as far as I'm concerned.
And fantastic, Brian. I'm sure, Kristy, you've come across Brian. And Brian is explaining unrecognised PDA led to literal decades of school trauma for me. So we can, again, this all goes back to why gatekeeping, it can't keep happening. We need to just embrace the people as they are, with the way they come to us. They might change their mind later. Well, not change their mind, but they might recognise later, actually, maybe I'm more this or maybe I'm more that. It's the way that sometimes families worry that their child's gender and sexuality is a fad, and they're gonna, and it's like, because they're working it out. They're trying on the outfit. They're working out, does it suit me? Does it make me feel happy and comfortable, etc., etc. That's not to say that they were wrong. It's to say that they were exploring, and that's okay that we can do that. And we need to hold a bit more space for people to be able to do that. Otherwise, we end up with situations like Brian being traumatized, which doesn't need to happen. Kat, PDA also brings in the importance of equality among all humans and human rights, and particularly because this is a very visual. So for people who can't see the screen, Kristy kept doing sort of bring out their hands horizontally to meet, to be like, this is what it means. You need that balance, and I think that's potentially what Kat is also expressing there. We've got Brian, who was explaining here, plus I am ADHD, which wasn't recognised well in schools also. I graduated secondary school before people recognised autistic people could also be ADHD. I like this.
That was a thing. That's absolutely, that makes no sense to me that was even a thing.
Especially in the States. If I'm not mistaken, Brian's back in the States, and he's, if I'm not mistaken, roughly around my age. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, there is so much difference between, ready salted autistics and salt and vinegar autistics. It's me and Kieran sat there one night and categorized all the different flavors into crisp flavors, as you do. But yeah, there's so much difference.
I really like this from our Victoria. So Victoria's part of Aucademy. To be fair, everyone part of Aucademy. This is also, I did this, and I don't think I'm PDA. But I don't like hierarchies either. So I refer to everybody on Aucademy, whether they're literally just watching us, everyone's an educator learner, because people teach me things from the comment section and things like that. And I don't like that hierarchy. I don't know why I said that. Oh yeah, because this is one of our other educator learners. So Victoria, a brain that's on permanent meerkat duty for them. Yes. I quite like that. That's nice. PDA is me listening to a live about PDA instead of doing something I'm meant to be doing. Any demand is uncomfy. It is invalidating my need for freedom. I lose me in a demand, so I have to try to find me and for others to see me, and then my PDA softens. It's when you can't do things that you really want to do and enjoy that I find most frustrating. And like we say, we've had Sai, who's also Northern Autie or Autitude, and I can see him in the studio, which other people can't see. So he's like, "What is she going to say?" And it's the bit where, because we do the physical descriptions for blind people at the start of the session, and just he's laughing. So Sai's thing is usually that he's like, what is it? Jason Momoa lookalike with luscious flowing locks and not a ginger beard and all this kind of thing, and it couldn't be further from what he looks like. he looks horrified, like, how dare you say I look nothing like Jason Momoa? Or asking about his dedicated interests, and he'll refer to. It's always about trousers, Sai. I know, the audacity of me. But it usually, he always says like his special interest or dedicated interest will be something related to trousers. It's really random, which just amuses me. It's that kind of humour. And this was actually sized from earlier on. So the lack of perceived demands is a demand for me. I need to be doing something to keep my brain quiet and to be in control. Doing nothing, I have no control. I don't think that's necessarily the same, but it sounds quite interesting. Like you were saying before, you almost have to like trick your brain by messing things up to some extent, that you've not got that pattern or routine, which to me sounds horrendous.
It sounds really confusing when he says that, but I really resonate with that. I have to have a number of options available to me at any number of one time, because the demand of sitting there and doing nothing and then being able to figure out what it is that I want to do or what I've got to do, I will literally sit there staring at a wall for hours.
Yes.
That is overwhelming for me. I can't. So I have to constantly have some kind of low-level demand, if that even makes sense, because otherwise it's just like things are crashing. And it's that low-level demand that allows you to hop around in your different flow states to whatever interest takes you. So I have a lot of little things going off at one time.
I've
Whereas the idea
my list. Sorry, I was just going to say list things. Yeah, I'll have a list of things so that it's always there. And then I can do something. Literally just pick
lists.
Yeah.
Oh, I can barely go with Google Calendar.
I've got calendars everywhere. This is the thing. This is why it makes it so interesting. This is why we like meeting other neurodivergent people. But then the horror of no structure. You're like, this idea that structure is like the devil. And I'm like, oh, I love structure. I love routine. I love knowing the things. So I'm definitely not, I would say definitely not PDA. No option means no control. Option means I can say no. Wait, no option means...
Yeah, so he's saying if he has no options, it means he has no control.
Yeah.
But if he has options, it means he can say no. So he's got the choice to exert his control there, should he wish to.
Got ya.
It's staying in that flow state and doing whatever pulls you in whatever direction and following like your monotropic brain.
I'm buzzing off the rhyme of that. I'm literally buzzing right now because that rhymes. Excited.
I've got a few more, but I'm just ignoring now the actual main live chat because there's 26 comments that I haven't seen. So I just won't be able to get to them. Kieran, I like this because Kieran chimed in as well. So finds it difficult to understand why those researchers that oh no, wrong one. I've done this one. There was another one that I wanted to pin. Kieran, sorry, that was the wrong one, Kieran. This is the one I wanted. Kieran says, I'm incredibly demand avoidant, which ebbs and flows due to how I'm feeling. I'm alexithymic. So for those who aren't aware, that means struggling to recognize in your body or articulate this thing called emotions, those difficult things called emotions and feelings. So Kieran says, I'm alexithymic and obviously monotropic. We've got a whole session on that and I still can't pick it apart quickly enough. So monotropic, just getting into that flow state, basically. So obviously monotropic, but don't relate at all to the rage or overwhelming fight or flight at all, or outrageous responses. So I think this is Kieran trying to pick apart, do I experience PDA? Do I experience a type of demand avoidant that wouldn't be classed as PDA? I love it that Kieran's like picking apart their own. We're going to be, even as advocates and educators and trainers and stuff, I know I'm going to be learning about my autistic neurodivergent profile until I die. And still be surprised by something.
Every day. And that rage thing, I think that was very much part of my growth, because my kind of history is not dissimilar to Kristy's at all. But that rage thing, the only way that it's like a cold rage. And you learn to suppress it. I suppress it now. I can literally sit in meetings and suppress it, but it literally just feels like a coldness that literally goes over your body. Yeah, that rage is intense.
It feels like a higher self-esteem to me that like, how dare you? And growing.
I get offended by certain demands and expectations, but certain things just make me go cold.
Yeah.
That cold rage. And do you know what? On some days, so you were saying any demand in this, that, and the other, and that makes it sound like nobody can turn around and say, oh, Kristy, whack the kettle on, love. Or, do you know what? I could really, I've got this deadline and I could really do with your help. Do you mind giving me a few days to help me meet it? Because I'm really in a mess. Like, I will do anything for anybody. But as soon as that becomes an expectation, or I feel like I've set that precedent, and then it's a reason to be horrible to myself, not setting boundaries. It's wrapped up in this whole self-blamey kind of thing.
And I think that's really important, because there is a very narrow perspective of this thing called PDA. And it is this idea that you literally can't ask somebody with the PDA profile to do something or help you or whatever it might be. And I've had this conversation with Jodie of the Nurture Programme, who does explain and talk about their is their eldest daughter, isn't it? That's PDA.
Yes.
So, right? And we've had those conversations, and she's like, people get it wrong. Like if the environment is low demand, low arousal, I can walk past and say, oh, can you pick up that toy for me, please, kind of thing. Because they're saying it's not all demands, it's that they're not feeling threatened. And obviously that young person has the right to say, no, I'm not going to.
And that's it. It's been, and that's the real great thing. And that's why I think that we can tolerate more demands from neurokin, because in autistic culture, it's okay to turn around and go, do you know what? I really can't do that. And you don't have to explain. Like, no is a valid answer.
Yeah. And it's not just about, it's not, I mean, if someone said to me, Kristy, whack the kettle on love, no, thank you, I would feel owned and I wouldn't be able to do it. But it will depend on who it is.
And in what context.
Yes. And how well I know them and what kind of person they are, because it's about the energy of what's being asked. And
it's how it's framed. So I would never say to somebody, I'll whack the kettle on, but I'd be like, if somebody said that to me, I'd find that rude. But if somebody was like, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to get the shopping out of the car and carry that up. Would you mind making a cup of tea while I did it? Fine.
No problem.
No problem.
Yeah.
And that's really important and interesting as well, because there was a comment much earlier on in this very long thread of comments now, it's fantastic, where they were saying that their young person struggles with the tone of their teacher.
Yes.
What can I do about it? And I'm like, that young person sounds like they are feeling threatened by that person's tone, and I would go with that person's gut.
Yes.
And
about the energy of the person.
Teacher tones are often really fake as well. So I would say that young person's got a very, very good bullshit detector.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because the teacher's sing-songy, happy thing, it drives me insane. It's not real.
Yeah. But also if there's an authoritarian tone, never going to work. This is why I always say to educators, when you take a new class at the beginning of the year, share stuff about the human side of yourself. Talk about your favorite foods, humanize yourself, be honest and transparent, because that's what's valued by the PDA. I'm better off to say to my child, I'm really struggling. What do we do about the toy on the floor? Because I don't want to make you feel threatened, but I don't want to clean up your mess, rather than using indirect language, because they're dishonest strategies to get someone to comply. And the PDA child will know that straight away.
It's too sneaky. We don't need sneaky. We need honesty.
For me, when mine was little, everything was a game. Like, that's how it worked, with us, and they knew when I was pretending to be ignorant, and it was funny, and it became banter. You know what I'm saying? So, and that banter, we found a this, and everything sort of was much easier. So that banter still continues to this day, and they're adults and they're still here. You know what I mean?
Important. Yeah. My child calls me out publicly if I'm masking. My 8-year-old, it doesn't matter who the other person is, what the context is, they will say to me in front of everyone, Mom, you're masking and it's weird and it's making me feel weird. And I love that because it just brings me back down to earth, and it reminds me, and I can't get away with going, oh, sweetie, this is what autistic people do. I can't do that. I literally have to say to the adult or the people I'm with, they're right, I'm masking because I'm autistic, and it's very hard for me to feel safe enough to be myself with people. Yeah.
So I just keep seeing Bobby's naked cat just popping up.
That cat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we have days where, like, sometimes it's for me as well. Like, if days particularly hard, me and my youngest have days where we'll just pretend to be velociraptors for the day, just to get through it. But you know what? I enjoy it just as much as he does. I love it. I love doing the playing things, and just, oh, we need our shoes. Oh no, but the floor is lava, and then we have to like create little bridges out of the pillows and stuff. To I just love the drama. It's great.
My child likes to be the parent, but I have a condition around that. You can be the parent and I'm happy to be the child, but my name has to be bum cracker or poo-poo face. just because I need to hear them say it. So that's me taking back my autonomy, and we come to a negotiation like that.
Yeah. And sometimes I think as well, when they're struggling as well, I think we often try and hide our own emotions from our kids, and it's really dishonest.
Yeah.
You know, so my little one will constantly go, "You made me mad," and I'll be like, "Well, you made me sad," you know, and it's just having that, you know, not in a really blamey way, but it's like when this happens, when you're upset, it makes mummy upset. How can we problem solve that together?
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it's just collaborative stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why my youngest, at one point when I finally realized I'm autistic, just looked at me and, again, like you all, just was like, "And you didn't know this, Mom?"
Yeah.
And to this day, like, I'll come into the room and I'm doing something, and he's just like, "Oh my God, you're so autistic, aren't you? Like, as F, you are autistic." And I'm like,
Yeah.
but they're wonderful for that, because for me, I found when I needed to be a parent, it wasn't, because I was brought up a completely different way. It was all about the authority, you know, and it was all about do as I say. And, you know, having a German mother, coming from, you know, Germany and the war and all of that, it was like, you don't speak until you're spoken to type situation almost, you know. And my kids were brought up a completely different way. We were collaborators. And I never saw a problem with that. You know what I mean? And people were like, you know, you need to have more boundaries with your children. I'm like, boundaries we have work for us.
I am so proud. Like every time, if there's ever a phone call from school and one of them's stuck up a tree and he's telling the teachers to F off and he's not doing this, that, and the other, I'm secretly like, yes.
Yeah.
You know, well, what did you do to him? What did you ask him to do?
Yeah.
You know? And I think,
all of the things that we reject or resist in our children are the things we value in adults. They're the things that we want our children to learn, to be able to say no, to not be vulnerable to predatory behavior from other adults, to set boundaries, to explain the way they're feeling, to give voice to their experience. And PDA children do this naturally. And as adults, our conditioning, our social and cultural conditioning means we resist that, we reject it, we feel threatened by it. I love it. It has brought me back down to earth with one giant thud, but it has gifted me the most incredible experience as a human being, to be so vulnerable and so real. It's just, it is an incredible gift.
Yeah, you can't even conceptualize the relationship that once you build that relationship with PDAs, you can't even, it's magical, because it's just so there.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. And another thing that I think we ought to give mention to, but I'm aware that we're like going way over time, and I think that's always missed as well, is PDAs that fawn.
Yes.
PDAs that fawn. And I think that is massively underestimated as well, because there are so many people that are missed. And I think that comes back into the gatekeeping thing as well, because the understanding of PDA is the out there telling people to F off, being really kind of a little bit, you know, what we conceptualize as rude or whatever. But actually, there's an awful lot of PDA children out there and adults that fawn and mask and hide it, and that's really dangerous. And it's really, and that comes back to gatekeeping and the invalidation of really where all the identification and the research is going, because it's kind of, it's invalidating their experience.
It's like the white little boys.
You can't be autistic unless you're having a meltdown, like you're a 3-year-old white boy and you're having a meltdown and you've got delayed speech. That's what it screams of to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Find something, just letting people know that they can find details of, people are asking, where do we find these people and all this kind of stuff. So yes, in the descriptions on Facebook for the video and on YouTube, you will find details of the people on the screen and where you can find them, basically. I've got Victoria's, so Victoria's young person is amazing, just very, very funny. And their child is out to tell the world to fuck off, which is French for P-H-O-Q-E. And we even designed Aucademy like merch where it's a seal and it just says "fuck off." It's amazing. Oh no, it's "OFOC." It's "OFOC" on the t-shirt. And that is that young PDA's way of telling somebody to go away, but in French, right? So I'm not
It's a seal, so it's not really offensive.
I've heard about this.
I'm not swearing, I'm just talking about seals.
Yes.
So, because my dinner has been ready for a while, which is fine, but I am getting a little bit hungry. I just want to summarise some of the key things about what potentially PDAs might need and want, because obviously, again, we can't speak for everyone, but going forward, what this identity needs. So Tanya mentioned it before we came on, but it's basically what we've talked about as well in terms of the issues of the literature and the research. So socially conscious research was Tanya's comment, which I really like this phrase, socially conscious research, more focus on lived experience. I mean, that should always be the focus, I'm honest, because we're dealing with human beings. And so we should be working with and alongside and by autistic researchers who also have that demand avoidant profile. Because we have nothing about us without us as a phrase that we use quite readily for our autistic experiences. It should be the same with PDA and any other disability. And then my last point, which is going back to this whole thing of like nothing about us without us. Why at this point is it all without PDA as being the go-to for their lived experience? So this is about calling out gatekeeping. If you can't do that, if you don't feel safe to do that, so I want to be clear, don't put yourself in undue potential for distress and what have you. But we do need to call out gatekeeping. Scoop all those neurodivergent people looking for identity and community. This is what we need to be doing. Even if it triggers us, then walk away. If you're okay and you're not being triggered by the language when people come into a space and they've never been in autistic spaces before, etc., and you're not triggered, okay, gently scoop those people, okay, because they don't know any different. We didn't know any different, probably right at the start as well. If you're not in that place to gently scoop and educate, that's fine. Step away, somebody else will do it. Okay, but we have to call out the gatekeeping. We can't have this continuation, not from the community anyway. We've got enough of it from the people who perform neurotypically. There you go. There's scientifically, Kristy, you're quite right. There's no such thing as a neurotypical person or brain, but there are certainly people who are able to perform neurotypically much more readily than we are. Fantastic. So from the normies, yes, Katie Monday, the normies. So our final questions, thank you so much. We might have to do this again and cover even more things around this topic. But we're going to end on our two final favourite questions, which are, what is your current favourite or new stim? So you might not have a favourite, it might just be your new stim. So we'll ask Kristy, because you're our guest today. So any new stims or favourite stims or current stims?
No new stims, but I find myself walking through the house. Mine's so stereotypical, to be honest. It's just I do this a lot with my hand, or I shake my arm. But I've always done this thing before I even knew I was autistic, where I subtly move my fingers in rhythmic patterns. So I might have my hand resting somewhere and just be moving my fingers. I always thought it was because I play the piano. It's an autistic stim. Yeah. Oh, and I also love, in bed at night, rubbing my tootsies together like a cricket. Oh.
Just the word tootsies as well is such a lovely word, tootsies. That always amuses me when, meeting autistic people when they consult and things like when I consult with them, and the way they explained themselves to themselves before they knew their identities. Yes. So explaining away their stims, or I had somebody the other day explaining away why they need subtitles, right? So they're explaining that way on something, because that's what we do. We try to understand ourselves. And again, this is why it's important that we don't gatekeep. We need that understanding, because otherwise we don't necessarily know why we do the certain things we do and what might help. Our other question, please, Ben and Orsai. What is your favourite form of potato?
Ben.
We've ABA'd.
Go on, say you don't like
Bobbi.
potato. No, I'm joking.
Ben, because he always comes on as a
potato. I love a good baked potato with all the stuff: garlic, butter, champignons, cabbage, bacon, cheese, sour cream.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that does sound good. I want a baked potato now.
No,
I know, I'm hungry now.
It's
And then
like
I'm
10 at night and I want a baked potato. I'm thinking, where can I get a baked potato?
Sorry, let's cover me. We don't need to see me. That's fine. Sorry, Bobbi. You can see yourself a little bit better. I just didn't want to cover Kristy as well. So I'm assuming this is Sai. So you know when you get a bag of baby new potatoes out of the drawer, and instead of cutting it open with a kniffy or a pair of scissors, you rip the bag open with your bare hands, and 3 of the little buggers fly out onto the floor. 1 is by your foot, 1 rolls under the table, making you put your back out to retrieve it. And that last little swear word you can't find. Well, it turns out it rolled under the fridge, and 3 months later, it's grown legs of fluff and dead wood lice. The only reason you know it exists is because
the smell.
Wait, where's oh no, where's the rest of it? Because you can hear it scuttling across the floor at 3 a.m. To take its nightly bath in the dog's water bowl, leaving a sludge of starch as it floats its way back under the fridge. Yeah, not that one. And on that bombshell of a story.
Sorry.
Oh, and Sai has given us also a fact of the week. The fact of the week, this is new. So the fact of the week, you can't control PDAs, they do what they like. Fact of the week, Pringles innovator was buried in a Pringles can. Is that true?
Yes, I hope it is. American. They're American, so I'm probably, and I really hope that's true.
Oh, and Victoria's saying that they're glad.
Made that up.
I don't know. He usually comes up with quite good facts, but Victoria. Sorry, say it again.
How did they fit, or was it like a custom made?
He's Cincinnati, Ohio. His ashes were buried in a Pringles can at his request. In the original flavour Pringles, Pringles container in his grave in suburban Springfield Township in 2008 in Ohio. That was the thing.
Right,
maybe it was PDA. Maybe he had the last laugh.
Yeah, sounds neurodivergent.
Thank you ever so much. No, Pringles are potatoes. You can't escape me. Thanks for that, Si. Take that off. We're finishing up now. Thank you, everyone, so much, and particularly our lovely educator learners who commented and engaged in the comment section. There was loads going, and I just didn't get enough chance to look at all of them, but we skimmed a lot. Really lovely engagement, and thank you for sharing what you feel PDA might be for you. Because this was an extra session, so this Saturday's session, we are covering rejection sensitivity. So that's a big thing for lots of autistic ADHDers particularly. So we're going to cover what is this thing. So feel free to awkwardly wave while I find the outro music and the button. I really liked it last week because I was like awkwardly wave, and Katie Monday was the host, and they were even like singing. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep it going because it was too great to listen to Katie sing. Okay, outro. Bye, everyone.